Welcome back to the channel. This is Trinity Storm, and you are watching What If Naruto Awakened After a Millennia. If you enjoy this video, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. And now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
Awaken. He's never been prone to errors. A gruesome death may result from such an action. It was long ago that he discovered this. Rise and serve your new master. He is, at least in his own opinion, a king, an entity more powerful than anyone could aspire to be. There are people in the world who are adamantly opposed to this notion. Open your eyes, mighty beast, and join the scourge. One of the most powerful creatures on the planet and a major danger to the entire world is Arthas Menthal, a human paladin who was turned into a death knight and bound with a cursed sword and a lich. He now commands his undead legions to gradually infect the world from his home in the most remote parts of Northrend. Since they are the ones who constantly get in his way, he currently wants to eradicate the Horde, the Alliance, and the Scarlet Crusade. Stand and give your might and your army over to me. He is constantly searching for new topics and supporters for his cause. He will subjugate them if necessary to obtain them. He has already resurrected a number of strong dragons from the dead and persuaded the Quillboar and the Vicryl. In addition, he has already conquered innumerable lesser creatures. Your time of rest is at an end. He is always searching for ways to make his army better and seeking out anyone who could make the scourge stronger. The power of nature itself will no longer be need for you. He had discovered a scroll that showed a long, forgotten race, kept deep underground and imprisoned in a crystal safe, something that would permanently cement the scourge as rulers of the world. Awaken and embrace a new power. That was why Arthas was now in a great hall, standing in front of a person who was entombed in crystal. With energy flowing from the blade and into the crystal, he aimed his sword at the tomb, which was ablaze with strong, ancient magic, with the intention of shattering it open. Legends about this region, this citadel, are contained in the scroll he discovered. There are legends of this strong and ancient race that supposedly dominated the land before the arrival of the Titans, thousands of years ago. And he discovered them, buried far beneath Sylvanas of all places, and shrouded in a potent illusion. Those idiots from Cenarion never even suspected. He was almost overcome by the sheer volume of life energy in this place when he first arrived. He was truly amazed by anything for the first time in a long time. But he persisted. He had a task to accomplish that would advance his cause. By designating this race and the insects here as a new plague land, he might be able to claim this desolate area as well. Finding any concrete proof of this ancient race's existence took him an hour. It appeared as yet another ancient scroll. There were many strong spells in it. Despite being unfamiliar and unintelligible, the words were full of vitality and had a faint bloody odor. This was a very strong scroll. When he discovered it, he couldn't control the excitement that swelled inside him. Later on, he would give it to Kel'Thuzad to translate. 10 minutes later, he discovered his concrete evidence, and the sight before him caused him to exclaim in astonishment. She was the one. She was lying face up on her back, frozen in crystal. Her eyes were closed in perpetual sleep, her arms folded across her huge bosom, and her flawless face was framed by her silky pale blonde hair. Her head had a purple diamond mark on it. On top of her head were a pair of purple ears that resembled canines. He could make out the tip of a tail, but her lower half was obscured by thicker crystal. He had thought, she's gorgeous, but he was afraid to try to wake her. Before he could do that, he had a much more important matter to attend to. He then gave the sleeping woman a final look before continuing on his way. As he advanced, he saw the frozen bodies of many more, including a girl with pale skin and dark blue hair, whose adorable lips accentuated her feline teeth. A man with a lot of muscle and two ox-like horns protruding from the sides of his head. A woman with short hair that resembled a turtle's shell and was likely hardened as such was hunched over as though thinking. Each of the hundreds of them was more distinctive than the others. Some appeared to have mixed ancestry, with characteristics of multiple beasts manifested on their bodies. Others appeared to share a common ancestor. He smirked as he eyed them all. Indeed, when they returned to the world, they would shock everyone. After arriving at a large, immaculately preserved door, he gazed at it for a brief moment before going inside. He discovered his prize here. He knew right away that they were the most powerful, the leaders. Even though there were 9 of them, all of whom were sleeping behind a crystal veil. Their arrangement gave the impression that they held varying degrees of authority. He looked at each one, trying to find the strongest. His gaze fell on the person with the bright yellow, spiked hair. Yes, you are the one. He raised Frostmourne and started his spell. Don't do it, you fool. You'll destroy us all. Hey, don't try and twist the situation, Dobie. I told you I'd do anything to gain power. If that means I have to do this, then so be it. No, damn you. Stop, Teme. Stop. Hey, too late. See you in the New World Order, slave. AAARRRGGGHHHHHHH, brat. Do it. Do it now, Teme. What are you doing, Dobie? Stop it. Hey, you lose. See you never again, fool. Blash. Wah. What's happening, Dobie? What did you do? Hey, I told you. Not to, but it looks like I had to go with plan B. Looks like the furball's power outweighs your own. No. No. Say goodbye to your precious eyes, Teme. No. Let the merging begin. Make me proud, boy. Make us all proud. The age of ninja and the Uchiha is over, Teme. I'll see ya when I wake up. If you survive, that is. No. Wake up. Bastard. Wake up. The crystal burst into crimson light, a mesmerizing display of energy. When the crystal exploded outwards, the blond man was released and fell to the ground, almost knocking Arthas off his feet in the process. As the memory slipped from his mind, his bright blue eyes became unfocused and shocked. The Lich King's vision was obscured as a dense cloud of dust was kicked up. With his sword out in case of assault, Arthas took a cautious step forward, ready to defeat this man should he prove to be an obstacle. At last, the dust started to settle. The Lich King raised an eyebrow at the odd shape when a silhouette emerged. So, you're not human. He smiled. Huh. What happened? Where am I? Arthas was reminded of those Draenei when he saw a paw emerge from the dust, followed by another, and then a pair of red, furred canine legs standing erect. However, this man had paws instead of hooves. Damn, my head hurts. The remainder of the body became visible. A small open vest hung just below his pecs, revealing a chest that had been concealed by crossed arms. A thick strap slanted diagonally across the vest, holding a huge blade to his back. His hands, aside from the claws that appeared capable of tearing through steel, were fairly normal in appearance by human standards. His pupils were slit, like a cat's, and his eyes were a startling shade of blue with a crimson ring around the irises. He had 3 thick, whisker-like marks on each cheek, and a pair of fangs protruded from beneath his upper lip. In addition to having crimson fur, his ears were absurdly long, resembling those of an elf but more animal-like. As they listened to the sounds around him, they slanted back from the side of his head that was twitching. 9 long crimson-yellow tipped tails swayed behind his back, and he wore a pair of dark red shorts that ended just above his knees. After a moment, the man's eyes widened as they adjusted to the slightly darker area. I'm awake? As Arthas stepped forward and caught the beast man's attention, a smile couldn't help but dance across his face. The man tensed, his nose twitching as he inhaled the stench of decay and death, and he gasped. He said, what, are you? His odd eyes narrowed their focus more than was likely normal. Unfazed, Arthas started toward the man with a menacing smile. I am the Lich King, your savior and your new master. He raised his weapon and pointed it at the individual. I have awakened you from your slumber just as I plan to wake the rest of you, so that you may join the scourge and help me purge this world of all life. The man's eyebrow went up. He crossed his arms and said, straightforward, aren't you? Arthas couldn't contain his laughter. Sincerely, he anticipated angry shouts and declarations that he would never join such a repulsive creature, but instead he was asked calmly about his recruiting strategies. But the man interrupted him before he could say anything more. He paused and grasped his weapon's hilt, saying, although I appreciate you waking me up, Lich San, I'm afraid I must decline your invitation to join this scourge. Because now that I am awake I have my own agenda to get started on, and I serve no one. Arthas was not offended by this boy's disobedience. That was what he anticipated. Nevertheless, he continued to gather energy and narrow his eyes. I am afraid, noble warrior, that you have no choice. An unholy energy burst from Frostmourn's tip and struck the man's chest, sending him flying into the crystal coffin of a tall, dark-skinned man who resembled a hybrid of an ox with 8 tentacle tails. Although it trembled a little, the crystal was unharmed. As he gripped his chest, the fox man exclaimed, "Ah!" He could feel the sickness attempting to slow him down. Arthas grinned and walked steadily toward him. He remarked, "You just woke up, you stand no chance against me. Submit now and save yourself the trouble." With a growl, the man stumbled to his feet. Arthas laughed and raised his sword once more, his eyes glowing brighter behind his helmet as he said, "You're testing my patience, Lich San." "I'm testing your patience? Hey, how arrogant of you." He shifted. The man's reaction time was almost too quick. In an instant, Arthas struck the man's blade with his own. The ground rumbled as a burst of energies as disparate as day and night ripped through the room. His opponent grinned, and his bright blue eyes widened in surprise. He heaved after saying, "I may have just woke up, but I am far from weak, Lich San." Arthas barely had time to raise his own sword to stop his opponent's counterattack before he was flung off his feet. From the two came another blast of energy. In fact, Arthas could feel the foxman's blow straining his arm. "You are strong," he said. "Good. The scourge will make great use of you and your people." Arthas tried to punch the foxman in the stomach, but he jumped back. Then he hurried once more, faster than before, and attempted a horizontal strike. The blade slammed into the crystal tomb of a red-headed man with tanuki features as Arthas leapt up and over. When Arthas noticed that the crystal was unaffected, he arched an eyebrow. Whatever sealed you all away must have been truly formidable." The foxman gave a nod. He prepared his blade and said, "Yeah, I'm actually surprised you were strong enough to release me. Though now that I am free, the crystal is sure to strengthen. You won't get anyone else out of here. Hey, without help I won't even be able to awaken them now." Arthas laughed. "I am more than willing to lend you a hand. No thanks, Lich San." Arthas let out a sigh. "I see you cannot be reasoned with. But it seems I have no choice." The Lich King was surrounded by a chilly aura that grew stronger by the moment. No one outside of the Scourge's most devoted and powerful enforcers had ever witnessed or survived to tell of the energy that suddenly exploded off the Lich King in a display of power. Arthas gave the foxman a piercing look before he said, "I am done playing with you, boy." In an instant, the foxman's breath was gone, and his pupils shrank in sheer shock, causing his eyes to enlarge to absurd proportions. As his opponent froze, Arthas grinned. "Like I said, you are still weak. I can tell you are very strong, impressively powerful in fact. But most of that power is still asleep." Taking a step forward, he raised his blade, calling for the very soul of everything it touched with glowing runes that radiated a twisted, foul energy. "Do not worry. That power will return to you. I will make sure of that, my second in command." As his blade swung down, slicing straight through the man's torso, he laughed evilly. Arthas grinned. "Welcome to the Scourge, mighty Biju Kin." The foxman emitted a burst of life energy that instantly healed his minor wound and severed the Frostmourn's connection to his soul. The gasp that came out of Arthas's mouth was unavoidable. "What? So you know of my kind? Either we haven't been asleep long enough or there are legends about us." A sphere of pure energy mixed with wind itself suddenly came to life in Arthas's hand, causing it to screech as it grew more powerful by the second. Arthas jumped back as the foxman swung at him with his tails, climbed to his feet, and held it up. "If you know about us, then surely you must know that the Kyuubi is not so easily defeated. It was fun while it lasted, Lich San. But I too am done playing games." In order to drive his energy sphere straight through the stunned Lich King's chest, he reared it back and charged. "Goodbye, Lich San." He pushed the sphere in front of him. "Fuden Rasengan." No. In a desperate attempt to save himself, Arthas threw Frostmourne against the Rasengan at the last second. As the two opposing energies combined and then burst with the force of a huge bomb, the foxman's eyes widened in horror. There was nothing Arthas could do. Just as the explosion ripped outwards, he had to teleport, forming a death gate. But the foxman, thrashing wildly through the air, was also trapped in the gate. Last heard was, "Shit," before both warriors disappeared. On the surface, one of the enormous Silithid hives was destroyed by a tremendous explosion that sent debris miles into the air, leaving the druids of the Cenarian Circle gasping in awe. A patrol exclaimed, "What in the name of a loon was that?" "I don't know." They waited for the dust to subside and the chaos to subside before noticing a green glow in the distance. The druids sensed the life, the energy, that emanated from that place. It drew them in. Unaware that they were going to make a significant discovery, they set out an hour later. The Death Gate emerged, unseen and unsaid, in the woods of Tricycle Glades not far from the Scarlet Monastery. Clinging to his injured right arm and breathing heavily, the foxman staggered out. He was a complete mess. His blade was cracked and warped, and my clothes were in ruins. One of his tails was broken, and a gash in his forehead was gushing blood. Damn, that Lich guy sure doesn't know how to quit. Never hearing the gasp, never seeing the two figures coming quickly, he took a few more ragged breaths before he fainted from exhaustion. Sally Whitemane, the High Inquisitor, blanched in disgust as the two young warriors entered the cathedral carrying what could only be described as an abomination. However, she was only able to ask a question in a voice that was a mixture of fascination and scorn. "What sort of creature is this thing?" A girl with pale blonde hair, one of the warriors, looked anxiously at her leader before speaking. I do not know, mistress. He appeared in the forests. I do not know how, I only saw him collapse. How interesting. Tell me, is he Scourge? Numerous tests have proven that he does not have the plague, but there is evidence that he was fighting something from the Scourge. I can sense much power within him, whatever he was fighting was strong. A pause occurred. Whitemane became even more fascinated. This man was unlike anything she had ever seen. Leave him. I will handle him from here on. Return to your post. They both saluted, turned on their heels, and walked away, though bewildered by the complete absence of blood that should have followed when they were turned over. Whitemane traced a delicate hand along his jawline as he glanced back down at the creature, observing his remarkably human-looking face. With a cruel and amused whisper, she started, "You should count yourself lucky that you're such a unique thing that we found ourselves too curious to simply kill you." As she left the unconscious best man on the stairs and made her way out to the aemery, there was another pause before the sound of delicate yet authoritative footfalls filled the room. She turned to Scarlet Commander Morgraine, her second in command, just before leaving through the enormous doors. "Make sure he is properly healed and looked after." Despite his shock, the man dared not defy, "Yes, mistress." Examining the temple, the druids moved through the open chamber in a daze, their faces displaying awe and wonder. As their brains processed what they were seeing, their fingers moved mechanically along the crystal. A short, stunted night elf looked at the creatures behind the crystal and muttered, What is this? Such life. Their energy, it fills me to the core with its presence." She was perplexed. An entire race, asleep in this land. I never knew. We must inform Lady Whisperwind and Lord Staghelm. This is unbelievable." Another Tauren exclaimed, and look, as he gestured toward the broken remnants of one of the crystals and the many indications of combat. Something was here, something undead. Eyes widened and then squinted. The power they experienced in that explosion could only be attributed to one being. The Lich King was here. Yes, and it appears he has woken one of them up. In fact, 8 individuals who were clearly the strongest were seated around a sizable table in a separate chamber. But all that was left at the head of the table was the shattered remnant of one of the crystals. "Secure this area," yelled the post commander. "If these people have lost their leader to the Scourge, they are doomed if we cannot wake them. Quickly inform our superiors of this. We cannot let these people come to any more harm." He turned to look at the sleeping bodies. "I've never seen beings like you before. Who are you?" Distracted by his thoughts, he turned away. "And how long have you been here?" He didn't get a response. His voice was filled with pain as he spoke out in his restless sleep, and he stirred as memories pounded his mind. "No, damn you. You have to sacrifice. Goodbye." His tail started to flail about as the memories became too intense, and he gripped the sheets tightly. "Teme!" he exclaimed abruptly as he leapt to his feet. His eyes blinked after a few seconds of being wild and distracted. He asked, "Where am I?" In a rather simple but opulent-looking room. He saw that red and white were the primary color scheme's favorites. At first, he was shocked as he remembered fainting in a spooky forest. His blade, clearly in need of repair, was leaning against the wall. Hell, he was shocked that it held up against that lich guy for as long as it did. He also looked at himself and saw that he had bandages on his head and the part of his tail that was farthest to the left. It was broken, and he knew it immediately. His injured arm and chest were also covered in several more bandages. He tried to stand up, squirming as his legs resisted the abrupt motion and stretched as far as they would go without hurting him. "Damn," whispered he. "Lich. San was right. Most of my abilities are still asleep. I'm not even healing." He let out a sigh. "In time, I guess." He fixed his gaze on the door, which had 2 exquisitely carved pieces of mahogany that clearly swung outward. He prepared himself for anything since he had no idea what to anticipate when he walked up and placed his hand on the door. But he froze when the door opened and a woman with silver hair and pale skin appeared, her face startled. Her surprise caused her gray eyes to widen slightly and the bandages she was carrying to fall to the floor. Even he was rendered dumb by the experience. She was a human being. He was taken aback. When he last woke up, humans had been extinct for a century, but here they were. She was also stunning. Although the red marks on her face resembled bloody tears, they were a good fit for her. She wore a red chapeau that seemed to reflect light on her silver hair. A lovely staff with a big red gem set in the middle of a diamond shape was strapped to her back. The only clothing she appeared to wear over her torso was a red and black tabard adorned with elaborate golden patterns, and she wore red leather boots and black and red stockings on her legs. Her arms were covered in red coverings that extended from her hands to her upper arm. There was an aura about her, but he didn't sense any chakra. How intriguing that she was a different kind of human than she had been before. He noticed that his gaze was moving all over her body. Her arms, stomach, and thighs were all well defined and thick. She had a big chest. She was fairly large, though not as large as he had seen, and her lips were full and smeared with black lipstick. He couldn't control the silent wow, or the slight flush that came out of his lips as he eyed her. However, his eyes narrowed as something else abruptly came into focus. She was tainted by a foul energy that was distorting her thoughts and impairing her ability to think clearly. He grew more circumspect. Without bothering to pick up the bandages that were on the floor, the woman simply crossed her arms and scoffed. Even though it was well concealed, she was intimidated by the fact that she had to look up at him. He was a head taller than her. But she quickly stopped staring and turned to face him with a superior expression. "Ah, so the beast is awake," she said, trying to sound cruel and disgusted. He attempted to shift slightly, but she pushed him back onto the bed with a firm look. "Be still. You've been hurt." As he landed on his broken tail, he looked up at the woman and bit back a curse. "How long was I out?" She gave a shrug. "2 of our scouts brought you here 4 days ago." He arched a startled eyebrow. 4 days? I've really been out for that long? I must have been more injured than I thought." Although he was already concerned about the possibility of being taken and dissected in a lab, he decided not to disclose that he typically has an advanced healing rate. The woman scowled at his blatant non-human status as she examined him from head to toe and sternly inquired, "What is your name, beast?" He thought to himself, "Wow, this chick is rude," and crossed his arms. It's considered polite to give your name before demanding others. Her hand twitched toward the staff on her back as her expression turned hateful, but she made herself relax, if only for the moment. "Whitemane," she said firmly. "Whitemane? What an odd name, but I guess I can see where it fits, considering your hair and all." Her hand flicked back to the staff. "But anyway, where are we? Are we still in that creepy forest?" She snarled, "You still haven't answered my question," as the animosity started to surface. His eyes widened in surprise, and he rubbed the back of his head and laughed. He got back up and made a broad bow to the woman, who was smiling the entire time, saying, "Oh sorry. I am Uzumaki Naruto." She raised an eyebrow at him and said, "Sounds pandering." He simply shrugged and muttered, "Could be." She scoffed at him and said, "Impossible," which made him raise an eyebrow. However, he refrained from responding and instead collapsed back into the bed to rest. Whitemane simply gazed at him with curiosity and hatred. "You are a strange one," she finally whispered to herself. But when Naruto heard her, he questioned, "How so?" "A creature such as you is unique. I have never seen nor heard of one such as you before," she said after staring at him, her eyes attempting to burn a hole in his head. He arched an eyebrow. Weird. That Lich guy seemed to know a lot about us." He gave a shrug. "One would say that I'm new around here." Her eyes flashed with something he didn't recognize as she gave him another look. She questioned, "You're an off-worlder?" He sighed and closed his eyes. "Not exactly." Her expression turned to one of frustration. "Explain," she insisted. She sat down on the bed beside him, and he opened one eye. Her eyes told him that she would not leave until he told her everything about himself. Meh, so demanding," he smirked lightly. "Ya know you still have yet to tell me where we are." She leaned close to his face, their noses almost touching, and something like a snarl escaped her lips. She smirked cruelly as she said, "I assure you, beast, that you do not want to know." Now it was his time to laugh. "Heard that many times before. Trust me when I say you could not surprise me." She sneered, barely controlling her impulse to slap him. "Where we are is a place all beings not blessed by human forms or the touch of light should fear to be. You should count yourself lucky that you're even still alive." Once more, he arched an eyebrow. "And why am I still alive if you're such a prejudiced person?" She remained silent for a moment before getting up and practically running out of the room. "I suggest you recover quickly, beast. And watch what you say while traveling around this place. The Scarlet Crusade gives second warnings to no one." She slammed the door after that. Sheesh. Naruto closed his eyes and put his hands behind his head. He could see that the world had changed significantly since he had last been awake. And people, he reappeared. He must have been asleep for a very long time for that to occur, even though he might be of a different species. It was still unclear to him whether that was a good thing. Whitemane and Lich San appeared to be part of a rather unfavorable trend. but he was careful not to draw any conclusions from their interactions. He let out a sigh. He laughed ironically and said, "Man, what an eventful 2 hours I've been awake. But I guess it's better than being asleep for Cammy knows how long." His ear bent at a strange angle, and he winced as he turned his head. "Ouch," he muttered as he resolved his issue and looked at his blade. The fusion of silver, blue, and red was stunning. From the handle's end to the blade's tip, it is 6 feet 10 inches long. It was shaped like a bastard sword, but it was obviously intended to be a zanbadu. It had 2 edges, but the hilt was much thicker and gradually narrowed. The edge of the blade was crimson, like his eyes, but it glowed a lovely royal blue. The handle protruded from the top of the design, where a glass sphere swirled with red and blue mists, and the hilt featured a silver fox head that appeared to glare at invisible enemies. 3 red, tipped metal tails protruded about 7 inches from each side of the fox's head. Although it was a nice sword, the Lich King's sword had severely damaged it. He let out a sigh and averted his gaze from his blade, already beginning to feel bored. However, he was also not in the mood to get up and leave the room just yet. The Scarlet Crusade, or whatever it was called, sounded like a group that detested all non-human life. Naturally, this also caused him to ponder. What or whom were these Scarlet guys supposed to be biased against? So many inquiries. Sheesh, if only someone not trying to kill me could have woken me up instead. Then my entrance into this time wouldn't have been so fucked up and abrupt. He felt a twinge of pain in his ribs and winced. Then he realized he had hurt his arm. He sat up and winced again, saying, "Freakin' ouch." As he slipped from his bed, he muttered, "Screw it." He heard movement outside the room, and his ears perked up. He considered reaching for his sword, but decided that would give the wrong impression to a group of insane individuals who were probably searching for any reason to take his head and put it on a plaque. He sighed one last time before going to the door and pushing it open. When he stepped outside, he heard people gasping. He noticed that hundreds of people were suddenly staring at him, including Whitemane and a tall, blonde man in red with a headband on his head and a beautiful mace in his hand. He felt tense and started to perspire. He thought, "Shit, maybe I should have gotten my sword." When he came closer, the blonde man's eyes gleamed with hatred and narrowed as he turned to face him. "Abomination," he snarled. "Tainted creature." All too accustomed to names like that, the blonde Bijou Kin raised an eyebrow and looked down at the man without saying anything. He said, "Name's Naruto, yours?" The man fingered the handle of his mace and snarled. "Morgraine," Whitemane said. "Enough." Almost immediately, the man relaxed. "As you wish, my lady." Naruto gave the man a thorough examination. Even though he was wearing the same tabard and was fairly well built, he had the impression that this man was strong. The energy emanating from this man and many of the others in this room was palpable to him. Even with that enigmatic taint, he sensed the same energy on Whitemane. He gave Whitemane a look. She was staring at him with her arms folded. Disdain oozed from her voice as she said, "I suppose you want to learn," as though a creature like him didn't deserve to learn anything. She gestured dismissively, saying, "I suppose it's only natural if you are indeed new to this world. There's a library in this monastery. Go there and learn all there is you need to." How exactly am I gonna get there? I don't know where it is." She smiled at him. "You will just have to look. I'm sure you can, sniff it out." As he proceeded down the path, he ignored her amused chuckle and turned away with a huff, frightening the other people who, to be honest, had no idea how to deal with someone like Naruto. Whitemane called out, "Do not cause trouble, beast, and do not leave the monastery," and he opened the enormous double doors. He answered, "What am I, your pet?" and then walked out. Whitemane laughed once more. "Are you sure it is wise to let that thing wander unsupervised?" Morgraine asked, turning to face his commander. She shrugged absently. "Leave him be." Morgraine was more than willing to comply with the straightforward order, but he had to wonder what was happening. "Why do you show that beast such leniency, my lady?" Arthas wasn't content. His only opportunity to recruit the Bijou-kin as new members of the Scourge had been lost. He was aware, just aware, that Sylvanas was by now crawling with the druids of the Cenarian Circle and perhaps even with swaths of Horde and Alliance. He wasn't a man who got very upset easily, but he was disappointed that he had missed this chance. He had underestimated the strength and resilience of the Bijou-kin leader. Because he had underestimated him, a formidable new enemy was now prowling around, possibly looking for a way to wake up the rest of his brethren. That was not acceptable to him. Hordes of undead hurried to avoid him as he paced back and forth in his ice crown inside his chamber. He said, "This is most vexing," but no one heard him. He sighed and looked up. Then he grinned, though. He called out, asserting his immense command over his henchmen. Mashonen. A pause was followed by the kneeling appearance of a tall blood elf with sky-blue hair, glowing eyes, and pale skin in a swirl of blood crystal. The king of Lich arched an eyebrow. Blood was all over the elf. "Pardon me, Lord," the elf said. "I am still furthering the cause of the scourge down below." The king of Lich grinned. He said, "No worries, first. I simply have a task for you to complete when you are done with the Scarlet lands below." Mashonen raised his head. "For me, my lord?" The Death Knight was pierced by the Lich King's gaze. "Yes, it will. Prove your loyalty to me." Unlike most people, Masonen didn't start groveling right away. The Lich King was greatly amused by this. He is now certain that he made the right choice for this assignment. There is a man, a powerful beast. Like creature from ages past. I attempted to initiate him into the scourge. I failed. An image of Naruto flashed into Mashonen's mind, and his eyes widened in amazement. Once more, the Lich King spoke. After the Plaguelands have been firmly secured by the Scourge and the Scarlet Crusade residing in Havenshire down below are nothing but corpses. You are to find this man. Before he spoke again, Mashonen gazed for a few more seconds. What am I to do with him? Arthas grinned. Recruit him. Mashonen gave a nod. It will be done. Good. But as he walked away from the Lich King, Mashonen frowned slightly. He was nearly at liberty. He could sense the Lich King's grip loosening. He would eventually be fully released from the Lich King. It was just a matter of time. He is aware that the Lich King is also aware of it. The Scourge never had complete control over Mashonen. However, they left it alone because he had never betrayed the Scourge. It would be their error. Naruto got to know the Scarlet Monastery and its inhabitants quite well over the course of the following week. The leaders of this place had warmed up to him, if only enough to engage in brief conversations, but the younger, weaker subordinates still avoided him at all costs. Whitemane and Arcanist Doan were the two he spoke with extensively. Whitemane had taken to following him everywhere he went, usually insulting him whenever she spoke, while the mage appeared quite eager to teach even a beast. He became used to her presence in no time. He learned as much as he could about the current timeline in the library, where he spent almost all of his time. And he was completely shocked by what he discovered. He had actually slept through the birth, evolution, and extinction of whole new races. The world itself had undergone a complete transformation, with entire continents disappearing and new ones emerging, and entire civilizations rising and falling repeatedly. He and his brethren were made to be billions of years old. That is absolutely unbelievable. Naturally, he had not mentioned this to Whitemane or any of the others. The world was in chaos at the moment, and although the Alliance and the Horde were arguably the strongest defenses in the world, they spent more time fighting one another than they did actually fending off the threats that could kill them. Dangers such as the Scourge and the Burning Legion. He had been interested in the many races, too. There are 10 major races and many smaller, less well-known races spread out across the globe. His desire to venture out and explore grew as he gained more knowledge. Because of this diversity, he was certain to find strong allies who could assist him in reawakening his brethren. Additionally, he had discovered that the Scarlet Crusade was far darker than he had first believed. They were initially a valued and honorable ally of the Alliance, but something went wrong. Whitemane claimed that the Alliance had betrayed them, but he could also tell because of the tainted energy he sensed circulating within them. He had finally come to terms with the fact that he was still alive after they had discovered him. These were insane, bloodthirsty, delusional zealots who trusted no one but themselves. He had pondered what it was about him that they decided not to kill him. Maybe it was his individuality. Whitemane had said so many times before. His recuperation had also gone pretty well. He no longer felt pain in his arms or sides, and the bruise on the back of his head had disappeared. He was doing very well, even though his legs were still a little weak and his left outermost tail was still broken, not to mention that his blade still needed to be repaired. He was currently making his way back to his room in the cathedral when he was stopped by a man who was even taller and more muscular than he was. Naruto looked up at the man and sighed. Perhaps the only man Naruto genuinely didn't like in this monastery was this one. Herod, he said, go put a damn shirt on, will ya? An armored foot attempted to land in his stomach, but he ducked under the blow and leapt away. Watch how you speak to me, creature, he snarled. Naruto gave an eye roll. Herod was more insane than most of the other monks in this monastery, and he showed it every time he saw Naruto. He attacked him whenever he could, even though the High Inquisitor told him to keep his distance, laughing the entire time about needing a good challenge. Even though Naruto had quickly grown weary of it, he chose to avoid retaliating by simply dodging and disappearing before the insane Scarlet warrior could react. Herod scowled at Naruto from behind his helm, demanding that he purge the monastery of this corrupted creature regardless of who had developed feelings for him. Thoughts of killing this beast tormented his deranged mind. This creature, which was so obviously powerful but would not fight him, was intolerable to him. Herod reached for his axe and swung it in Naruto's face, causing Naruto to raise an eyebrow. "I can't take it anymore. Die, foul creature." Laughing, Naruto leapt to his feet and crouched, clinging to the ceiling with chakra. With a roar, Herod proceeded to hurl his weapon. "Herod!" Whitemane marched up the hall with a scolding glare on her face, and he froze. She ordered, "Leave the beast alone." Herod gave a strained, "Yes, milady," and then stomped away after appearing embarrassed for a moment. With a laugh, Naruto lowered himself in front of the woman, who smiled gratefully. She turned and began walking toward the cathedral area without saying anything. Without saying anything, he followed, losing himself in his thoughts once more. In the meantime, a woman with silver hair and bright red eyes grinned at the large group of abandoned people in front of her. "Tomorrow," she said, licking her lips, "we will rid this land of those obnoxious red ants." Cheers were raised. The real start of Naruto's journey would be tomorrow. Naruto was pleasantly surprised to discover that his body was fully recovered when he woke up the following day. He yawned, practically jumping out of bed and stretching as far as he could, and the smile that split his face illuminated the room like its own source of light. He focused on his palm and smiled somewhat gratifiedly as a tiny tornado appeared on his palm and vanished a moment later. "Looks like some of my abilities are already beginning to awaken as well, sweet." He was content. After just 30 seconds, it was already clear that today would be fantastic. He left his room without saying a word and realized right away that nobody was there. Probably all still asleep. Just how early is it anyway? He simply sighed in satisfaction, not giving it much thought, since it meant relief from the agonies of the so-called Scarlet Crusade, particularly Whitemane's bewildered ass. He was able to determine whether the woman liked or hated him after just 1.5 weeks of getting to know her. One thing is implied by the way she continuously disparages him and his species, but another is implied by the way she insisted on following him everywhere and inquired about whether his injuries were impeding him in any way. Sometimes he couldn't figure her out. He pushed open the enormous cathedral doors and went outside, muttering, "Hey, no use wasting a good morning griping about her," his smile still intact. Soldiers, priests, and mages were stationed outside. They stopped their patrols long enough to give him a stern look before returning to their ignoring him, assuming he posed no threat, for the most part, and carrying on with their prayers and mutterings to the light. As he gazed up at the sky, he too gave them little thought. It was lighter than when he went to bed, but it was a darker shade of gray than usual. The little wildlife he could detect in the nearby forest was still finishing up their nightly activities, and he could still smell the dew in the air. Such a gloomy place, he muttered as he leapt to the cathedral's roof to enjoy his brief moment of solitude. He was sitting on the roof's ledge when he noticed that his thoughts were starting to wander once more and that memories were coming back to him. Every time he wasn't busy with something else, they tormented him. His mind was forced to wonder when he was by himself like this, but being around Whitemane calmed, if not completely stopped, the flow of memories. He looked at his claws and sighed. Biju, kin. He had given him and his people that name soon after they were born. It was a name that had the potential to become the most well-known and dreaded name in history. Regretfully, they had to go into that slumber before they could actually start making history for themselves. When they were sealed away, they had only been in power for a century. His pointed teeth appeared to shine as they protruded over his lip in a slight smirk. The peace that he had finally brought to his world was the only positive outcome of this. However, it had resulted in the collapse of the entire ninja culture. However, the world had calmed down and stabilized during the 100 years he was adjusting to his new body. With the arrival of his generation, the world was assured of enduring peace. He closed his eyes and visualized a man with raven hair and glowing red and black eyes. He raised a transformed arm in the center of a huge statue with many eyes, wearing a superior smirk. "And to think it was all because of your crazy ass, Teme?" he murmured. "What in the name of the light is a Teme?" Naruto flinched and gave a startled yelp, almost falling off the roof in shock. He spun around to find the Hound Master laughing at him. "Loxi, don't sneak up on me like that, and how in the hell did you even get up here?" The Scarlet Crusader sat down beside the Biju kin and simply shrugged and laughed, not bothering to respond to the question. Naruto gave him another scowl before settling back into his chair. What the hell are you doing up so early, hyena man? Naruto smiled, ignoring the warning glare Loxi gave him. I could be asking you the same thing. You know the lady will not be pleased to find you gone from your quarters. Naruto's eyebrow went up. Hey, I know she feels differently, but I'm not her pet. Gazing up at the gray sky, the Hound Master laughed. She is rather possessive of you though. I find it strange personally. Naruto gave a shrug. I do too, especially since I'm not human. You guys by all rights should have dissected me the first chance you got. So you have reminded us more times than I can count. Can you even count very high? Naruto laughed as Loxi scowled and punched him in the shoulder. Naruto had liked Hound Master Loxi the most out of all the Scarlet Crusaders. The man had a great sense of humor and was silly. The two quickly became friendly with one another. Hell, Naruto struggled to determine whether Loxi's madness was due to the tainted energy or something else entirely. In any case, his company was surprisingly entertaining. Loxi repeated, so, just what are you doing up here? With a sigh, Naruto looked up at the sky, just thinking about the past. Ah, the past is quite a burden to those who let it be. Without really saying anything, Naruto nodded in agreement with those unexpectedly insightful remarks. Loxi smiled and shoved the blonde hard, sending him flying off the roof and onto the floor. Wah. Crash. You're acting too gloomy, beast man. Laughed Loxi. Lighten up. With a growl, Naruto, who was tending to the large lump on top of his head, spoke. I'm gonna lighten you up, you insane dolt. By removing that bald fat head, he yelled. Loxi laughed once more and then instantly disappeared, laughing the entire time as he fled for his life. With a simple sigh, Naruto stood up. He complained, fucking ass, as he looked to make sure none of his tails were broken. Again. A few of the Crusaders regarded him with disapproval. He chose to ignore them. Beast. He turned and met a frowning Whitemane's eyes. She insisted, what are you doing out of your quarters? Naruto's arms were crossed. Getting some fresh air. Is that a crime? Asked the man. And what the hell are you doing up so early? Her frown deepened until the Biju Kin burst out laughing. You'll get wrinkles if you keep scowling like that, Whitemane. Chan. She snarled, certain that Chan was making fun of her, even though she had no idea what he meant. Swiftly approaching him, she seized the strap across his chest and pulled him down, allowing her to glare into his amused eyes. You're coming with me back to your quarters. Isn't that your room? And isn't that a bit sudden? I mean, I know I'm good looking and everything, but... Whitemane's face was dark red as she punched him with unexpected force. I'd never commit such a horrible atrocity. That why you're blushing? Be silent. She drugged him back into the cathedral and back toward the room, ignoring his amused laughter. Morgraine gave him a knowing smirk as the other zealots and the like scurried away. He remained silent while being pushed into the bed and drugged into the room. He continued to smile and said, oof sheesh, a bit rough, don't you think? Whitemane did not find it funny. Still staring into his eyes, she collapsed onto the bed and sat beside him. Something dark flashed in her eyes, but he chose to ignore it. Her face was twisted into an angry frown, and she was clenching her fists tightly. With a sigh, he touched her shoulder. He said, thought I was leaving, huh? She glared at him after a moment without responding. You were going to stay right here. He sighed. He had no idea why she wanted him around, but he was a little annoyed by her blatantly stupid belief that she could control him. Look, I know I'm a new creature to you and your crusade, but that's just it. She gave him a defiant glare. He gave a small smile. I have things to do, Whitemane. Chan. I'm not meant to be cooped up in one place. I appreciate you guys looking out for me in my weakened state, but I'm really going to have to leave soon. A hand gripping his wrist almost possessively stopped him before he could stand. Startled by her beseeching expression, he glanced back down at her. He couldn't contain his laughter. Naruto wasn't a fool. He was fully aware of the purpose of the Scarlet Crusade. He was positive that these individuals were sick, deranged, and on the verge of evil. The agonized cries of slain adventurers and those who had previously tried to attack this location were audible to his sensitive ears. He had even been down there and seen some of the terrible torture techniques used on the many prisoners. With some amusement, he thought about how he would have attacked and killed everyone here, battled his way down to Interrogator Vicious, and freed all of his victims if he had encountered these guys when he was a human. However, he was no longer impacted by the actions of the Scarlet Crusade. He was aware of their mess, but he didn't give a damn. In addition, Whitemane's department was responsible for his care. Furthermore, torture was nothing new to him. They were praised as the world's biggest softies, and Konoha even participated in torturing its prisoners. Not to mention that he has been dormant for millions of years. Fighting again is the last thing he wants to do. Furthermore, once his power fully returned to him, he was confident he could free these guys from whatever had such a negative influence over them. He concentrated on the woman who continued to hold his wrist. He rubbed the top of her head lovingly and said, "Relax, I'm not leaving yet. I still have to awaken at least one elemental affinity before I'm sure I can defend myself properly out there." She briefly displayed relief, which she soon concealed, before raising an eyebrow in curiosity. "Elemental affinity? Are you a shaman? Or a mage?" Naruto laughed. With a smile, he held up a hand and said, "I'm not really sure what a shaman or a mage is, but I'm pretty sure that I'm not either of those." A tiny tornado briefly came to life in his palm before dying once more. "My species are people of nature. We work with the elements, speak with them, talk with them. They are our partners in nearly everything we do. I wonder how they will react once they realize that I'm awake. Or which one's gonna realize I am awake first and come to me." He did not tell her that his people were half demonic, too. The Biju were demons who possessed a great deal of elemental control. Indeed, the shinobi were people who had a connection to nature. He laughed to himself as he recognized how much he concealed from the Crusade. In any case, they didn't need to know that much about him, and he didn't want to deal with the consequences if he revealed even half of what he had kept hidden. He didn't want to consider White Mane's reaction if she found out. Once more, he was sitting and losing himself in his own thoughts. White Mane gave Naruto another close look after snorting and remarking, "Sounds like a shaman to me. Tell me, what exactly is a Biju? Kin?" Naruto jolted out of it and turned to face the woman with the silver hair. It's hard to explain. I guess you could call us remnants of the distant past, beings created by a man's dark ambition, another man's sacrifice and a bonding with powerful beasts of nature." "Sounds like a lot of crap." Naruto laughed. "Perhaps it is." White Mane gazed, unsure of how to interpret that assertion. 69. It was too simple. The Dark Lady had given them a fairly easy assignment: to destroy the Scarlet Monastery. As long as the task was completed, she didn't care how they accomplished it. They had made the decision to target the leader directly. After that, the rest would fall naturally. They had ridden quickly on their horses and set out early in the morning, before the sun had even broken the horizon. In order to prevent anyone from returning and alerting their leaders to them, they killed every crusader they encountered. It was pitifully simple. They were so intent on their mission that they neglected to clean the blood off their weapons as they savaged their way through the cathedral's hallways and gardens, leaving a trail of bloody devastation in their wake. With a mocking smile, one of the group members had even gone so far as to take one of the Scarlet Crusade's tabards from the body of a dead enemy and wear it on himself. So the objective is to kill White Mane and her lapdog first. That shouldn't be too hard. While cleaning his blade, a white-haired blood elf paladin made this remark. With about 30 bodies scattered indiscriminately in a gruesome display of blood and gore, the group had made the decision to take a short break in the courtyard outside the cathedral. It is not wise to underestimate your opponent. There is a reason White Mane still lives despite the countless assaults to this place. This came from an orc warrior with a scar across his face who had a rugged appearance. A massive battle axe that glowed with the magic of fire was being sharpened by him. With her own daggers glowing with enchantments that would poison upon contact, the dark undead Rouge next to him gave a silent nod. The hunter grinned and rubbed her fingers through the mane of the big white lion next to her. "Hey, you don't have to tell me that," she said. The final individual, another orc, remained silent. He was obviously a shaman based on his equipment. His shield, a huge turtle shell, lay on his back, ready to be used, and his mace gleamed in the drab hall. He was nervous, too. Almost everyone in the group he was traveling with was a stranger. All they were was a bunch of young explorers united by a shared objective. It appeared that only the paladin and the hunter knew one another. The others were still acquainting themselves with one another. They did, however, fight well together. Ideal combination of classes. Everyone else appeared to be busy, but they could have brought more. They weren't whining. The fewer people engaged in this behavior, the more their unique strengths would be acknowledged after it was over. The paladin grinned and started to get his shield and mace ready. "Okay," he said. "Let's do this." Tyrande Whisperwind could not be rescued from the Temple Valoon by much. The same could be said of the Cenarian Circle and Fendril Staghelm. But both of them, along with many others, were brought to Silithid by the news of this sleeping race. As they entered this citadel of wonders, adventurers from both the Horde and the Alliance forgot about fighting one another. It resembled a museum, with each individual preserved in crystal looking so stunning, resembling a cross between humans and various natural beasts without detracting from their overall beauty. They exuded an air of either reality, a sense of strength and age. Tyrande gazed at the 8 forms, frozen in place with various expressions of contentment and peace on their faces, as if they were innocents trapped in their crystal of dreams, and was mesmerized by what seemed to be the king's chambers. She moved toward the frozen figure of a man with black, ringed eyes and red hair. His expression was almost emotionless, with only a faint hint of uncertainty showing. She giggled at the tan, slightly round ears on either side of his head. He was adorable. She questioned what the big gourd on his back held or what the slightly faded blue and white cone-shaped hat he was holding meant. She also pondered the meaning of the symbol on his forehead. She whispered, "You are such a mysterious people." Even she, who had lived for centuries, had no idea who these people were or where they were from. Are they intruders? Inmates? Had they actually been here longer than the Night Elves? Perhaps. She turned and left. She would discover the solutions. A more comprehensive map of Azeroth's history had been found if these people were, in fact, a race older than the Night Elves. Maybe they were aware of the true nature of the Well of Eternity, or perhaps they were involved in its creation. Hell, they might even have important information about the ancient gods. She started to get excited. She said, "Notify the rest of the Alliance," to a Night Elf sentinel nearby. "I feel they should know of this as well." A Tauren was also en route to alert the Horde in the meantime. Despite his neutrality, he believed that they should be aware of this. Naturally, the conflict that would result from this didn't even cross his mind. A permanent change was about to occur in Silithid. They fled as if their lives depended on it, as if the hounds of hell were pursuing them. Their lives did, in a way, depend on it. They had no real idea. Just getting out had consumed all of their strength and will. A few hours later, the Scarlet Crusade had been pursuing them. However, they weren't fleeing from those people. They could still hear that strange roar, see those unearthly red and blue eyes, and feel the wind itself licking at their feet as though it were trying to ensnare them. A significant amount of their thoughts were clouded by fear, which yelled at them to run faster. Only the undead rogue and the orc shaman survived. They didn't want the rest of their group to know. There was silence. There was nothing to say. All that was required was action. Despite their fatigue and less than ideal circumstances, they ran straight through the small town of Brill at dawn. Young explorers and worried scouts called out to them, but to no avail. There was only one place they could go to where they could feel reasonably safe. Around noon, they arrived in the Undercity, where they were greeted by a startled, abandoned warrior who immediately took them to an inn so they could recuperate. The members of a group that had gone to conquer the Scarlet Monastery quickly spread their word throughout the Undercity. The fact that they had escaped that location was shocking. They needed a week to recuperate, and as soon as they did, the Dark Lady herself sent them a message asking for their audience. "Your names," she said impassively. First to move forward, the rogue bowed slightly. "My lady, I am Laviria." Gazing directly into her eyes, the orc uttered the words, "Kamal." The orc's tone irritated her a little, but she decided not to respond. Rather, she concentrated on why she had brought these two here. "It has come to my attention that you two have escaped from the Scarlet Monastery. I won't even say how disappointed I am, seeing as 3 of you were quite experienced. Those red ants should not have even been a problem. Care to explain?" Laviria took over after Kamal remained silent, preferring to be silent rather than speak. "It was easy," she said at first. "The 5 of us cut through all who stood in our way. They were no match for us. It is for this reason we decided we were going to go straight for Whitemane. With her dead, the rest would be easy pickings. We slaughtered our way all the way to the cathedral, where we met a group of well over 60 crusaders in prayer with Morgraine in front of them. That battle, while taxing, was also won, giving us a chance to confront Morgraine. Taking him down was relatively easy as well. But from there things got worse. As soon as Morgraine fell, the doors burst open and that woman strode out, glowing with light and fury. She brought Morgraine back in an instant and proceeded to attack with greater power and skill than anything else in the monastery. She nearly killed us. But we prevailed, killing Morgraine again and knocking Whitemane to the ground. She took a moment to steady her erratic feelings, which caused the dark boy to raise an eyebrow. But then the doors opened again and out stepped a creature I had never seen before in my life. We were all shocked so much that we didn't hear his gasp and yell out for Whitemane until he was in front of us with his massive blade jammed into the paladin's chest. He destroyed us, my lady. He was like a beast. He was a beast. He yelled something about attacking Whitemane and making us pay before he roared so loud and so fiercely that it locked up our joints in fright. The hunter's lion was the only one unaffected and tried to lunge at the creature's throat. But it didn't work. The man spun in a complete circle with his sword and cleaved the lion in half with little to no effort at all. The hunter, distraught by the death of her partner, screamed and charged. He grabbed her by the neck and snapped it like a stick. She was trembling a little, obviously still upset about the vicious deaths of her teammates, and she took a moment to gather herself. Knowing that this battle was lost, the warrior charged at the man, briefly stunned him, and ordered us to flee, hoping he would stall for time. We did as he said. We heard him kill the warrior, and then we heard him approaching. I have never been so scared in my life, but it didn't end there. This creature man was like a dog or a wolf on the hunt, and he chased us all the way to the exit of the Scarlet Monastery before yelling at us to never return. My lady, if the Scarlet Monastery is to be destroyed, we must kill that man. After a minute of observing the two, she glanced up thoughtfully. This man, what did he look like? Laveria paused to reflect. He was tall, nearly 7 feet tall, perhaps 2 or 3 inches shorter. He has wild, spiky, bright yellow hair and eyes that are blue outlined in red with a feline slit pupil. His ears are long and covered in red fur, and his legs are those of a worgen but with red fur, and his torso, arms and face are those of a human. He also has 9 canine-like tails. After observing the rogue for 5 minutes, the dark woman was convinced that there was no deceit involved. She let out a sigh. I see, she narrowed her eyes dangerously. Once more, the cathedral doors opened, and Naruto entered with a grim expression. He looked around, past the many corpses, until his gaze settled on Whitemane. She muttered to herself as light flooded around her. As she frantically attempted to heal Morgraine with her potent gift of light, her hands were pressed against his chest. As she poured more and more energy into him, she became more and more upset, and finally Morgraine's eyes opened and he gasped. My lady? There was a pause, and Naruto claimed to have seen Whitemane's eyes briefly light up with relief before they went blank, and she started talking. Morgraine, she said as she assisted him in standing up. Nothing more needed to be said, so she didn't say it. Naruto couldn't help but smile as he observed these two. Maybe there was still hope for these crusaders. Whitemane then fell apart. In an instant, he was there to grab her and lift her up in a bridal style. Wah. Shush, just rest now, Whitemane. Chan, said Naruto with a soothing voice as he held her. The woman sneered at him. Unhand me, beast. I don't require assistance from people like you. Before quietly leaving the room, Naruto rolled his eyes and snorted, saying, Whitemane. Chan, try not to get yourself almost killed again. You know, I only owe you so much. She felt like a child as he put her in bed and tucked her in, and all she could do was stare. Leave, she ordered, concealing her present emotions and causing Naruto to laugh. As you wish, my lady. When they finally stopped hurrying through, Whitemane's eyes widened in realization as he shut the door, leaving her to think. He saved me, she thought as she glanced around the room and saw Naruto's enormous sword and her staff leaning against the wall next to each other. She felt an unfamiliar surge of emotion and clutched the place where her heart is. They had invaded this cathedral, Whitemane was being attacked, and despite her personality and the nature of the Scarlet Crusade in general, he wasn't going to let that happen. In addition, he liked the High Inquisitor and could definitely say that he considered her a friend. Naruto closed his eyes and sighed, trying to get some sleep. Leaning against the cathedral doors from the outside, he smiled as he fell asleep. Take a nap, Whitemane. Chan, because I feel like chaos is about to break out. Lady Sylvanas Windrunner, Banshee Queen of the Forsaken, grinned evilly as there were posters that described this enigmatic beast man in great detail. The Scarlet Monastery was about to fall, and many Forsaken and Horde members looked at the posters with increasing excitement. Sylvanas would personally see to that. Perhaps I found worthy prey at last. Varimathras raised what might be considered an eyebrow at the undead blood elf leader of the Forsaken as she fastened her cloak over her shoulders, strapped her quiver and bow to her back, and armed herself with swords and daggers. You seem very excited about this, he replied. With a gleam in her eyes that he hadn't seen in a while, Sylvanas gazed up at the Nephrazim. Her smile was bitter. Of course I'm excited, she said. She started walking toward the Undercity's trading center, where countless groups of eager Horde adventurers were gathered, waiting for their chance for glory and gold at the prospect of wiping the Scarlet Monastery off the map. This beast that dared to oppose the Forsaken by aiding those red ants, he's something new and unexpected, and he'll make an excellent trophy. There weren't many since Sylvanas had only the day before posted that poster of this beast man, and the only people who had the opportunity to accept this quest when it was posted were those who had seized the opportunity. Not that it made much difference. The ranks could easily be filled with the Forsaken. I'll mount his head on my wall. Varimathras smiled back at him. Good hunting then, my lady. A small army of hordes and Forsaken, all cheering and prepared, met her as she emerged into the open. Despite his silence, Kamal was staring blankly at the crowd in front of him. He couldn't help but feel a little of the same fear that the undead rogue next to him was displaying at the thought of returning there. However, he was returning for some reason. Laveria was also going, if only because she felt safe in Kamal's company and had nowhere else to go. The only thing the orc had promised her was that they would kill crusaders. They had no intention of approaching Whitemane or that beast man. She was more relieved but still unsure. The dark woman was ranting about retaliation and how those human scum had finally gone too far, but neither of them paid much attention. His only concern was ensuring his survival. For some reason, he had a gut feeling that things wouldn't work out the way everyone else had anticipated. At last, they started to move. He glanced at his companion beside him and nodded reassuringly, calming her slightly. He said, "Let's go." Right, 69, Whitemane entered the room with an angry expression on his face as Naruto lay on his bed once more, lost in thought. Well, oh, Whitemane. Chan, what appears to be the issue now? With that grating smile she wanted to slap off his face, he asked. She gave him a minute's glare before letting out a sigh and sitting on the bed. I guess I owe you a bit of gratitude, she said, sounding as though it hurt more than being burned alive would. Naruto laughed. What do you suppose? He raised an eyebrow in question. You're so tense, he said, laughing as she glared once more, her face flushed with rage. Relax, what's going on? Is it your time of the month or something? She was strong, and the energy was so pure, well, if you take away the taint from whatever was driving her crazy. Her aura flared, golden and bright, and he stared at her in wonder. When the light faded from her, leaving her panting and almost unconscious, he smiled warmly and caught her as she started to collapse, lifting her up bridal style and gently placing her on the bed. Whitemane. Chan, it was nothing. After all, I owe you. The Biu. Kin leader was glared at by Whitemane as her eyes flashed and she sat up, saying, Don't expect anything like this again, beast, for it will not happen a second time. In response, Naruto laughed and said, Yes, Whitemane. Chan said, turning to walk out of the room. But he stopped when he heard a faint whisper, his ears perking up, and he turned back to face the white-haired woman. What was that? He inquired. Sally, she said almost reluctantly, and the High Inquisitor sighed. Naruto's long furry ears twitched once more as he turned to face this. What? She glared at him after sitting up a little. My name is Sally. My last name is Whitemane. Before he smiled, Naruto's eyes had widened for a moment. You mean Sally? It's a simple name, but it's still cute. He stopped and winked at her. I'll see y'all later, Sally. Chan. Missing her blush, he turned and left the room. He saw Loxi as he was getting out and chased after him. Dog boy, get your ass back here, he shouted in a mocking rage, and the dog boy yelled before taking off. You pushed me off the roof, and I still owe you. For a geezer he sure can run, Naruto grunted, turning to an amused and very battered looking Morgraine. Don't say anything, asshole, he said as he stalked off, frightening some of the other crusaders as he passed them with his fake anger. Loxi laughed like a madman and disappeared into the halls. Morgraine merely laughed. That beast was fine for an abomination, especially now that he had rescued the Lady Whitemane. Oh, and if that cranky woman asks where I'm at, tell her I'm out exploring the forest. Morgraine appeared prepared to object, but Naruto had already left. He cursed and shuffled back to his room, hoping the beast would return before the woman realized he was gone. 69. Naruto took a whiff of the dreary, stagnant air as he stepped outside and entered the forest. A taint pervaded the air, and the elements screamed in agony all around him. For a moment, he felt sadness rise inside of him as he heard the land and their cries for assistance. Things like Scourge, Burning Legion, corrupt dragons, and warring elementals with power unlike anything seen in the world posed a constant threat to the world, which at the same time was in turmoil. Beings from the distant cosmos known as Titans view the world as an experiment, convinced that without their guiding, interfering hands, this world would be a savage, uncouth one. The world had undoubtedly changed a great deal from what he remembered of it, with all these new and exciting places, cultures, and people roaming around, accentuated by their wide variety of talents and fighting ability. And the world was infected from below by creatures who called themselves old gods. He did not know what these ancient gods were, and they were certainly not present when he was last conscious. However, he could surmise that they were intruders, most likely from a different dimension or world. Without the protection and cooperation of the Biju, the elements fell prey to those ancient gods, and the chaotic elementals are probably the result of their lack of direction from their lifelong partners and avatars, the Biju, or Biju.kin as it may be today. He sighed. Once he figured out how to wake the Biju.kin, he and they had a lot of work ahead of them. Since they are the last relic of the past and a reminder of Azeroth's early years, it was time for them to take on their role on this planet. Azeroth. The Biju.kin would be responsible for guiding these children, who would be the tool that returns Azeroth to the prosperous paradise it once was, as the final symbol for what were once known as the elemental nations. He rather liked the name the people had come up with for the world. Minus the conflicting shinobi, of course. He committed the forests of Tricycle Glades to memory as he strolled. When he regained his full power, he would heal here first. 69. Even though it took almost 4 hours to reach the monastery, Sylvanas and everyone else were too thrilled about the possibility of eliminating a significant branch of the Scarlet Crusade to be deterred. Despite the small size of the army, it was impressive. Hundreds of hordes and abandoned soldiers flanked the Banshee Queen on either side, and there were multiple catapults with explosives and plague-laden bombs encircling those flanks. Without a stirring speech, or even a word more than a command, she smirked as she stood there gazing at the Scarlet Monastery from 1,000 yards away, then turned to the small army gathered behind her. I want that cathedral to be the target of those catapults. She and her pet will be drawn to us. The others, yelling war cries, trailed behind her as she launched herself into a dead sprint. The first crusader she saw had barely had time to open his eyes before an arrow pierced his throat before she drew her bow. The others rushed into the area and poured into the monastery a moment later. 69. Whitemane's eyes opened as a wave of uneasiness swept over her, so intense that she almost closed her eyes. She sprang out of bed, grabbed her staff, and rushed into the cathedral hall where Morgraine was waiting. The paladin nodded, his own weapon drawn and his eyes focused, and Whitemane looked around. Something is off, she said, sounding tense. Where is the beast? I'm sorry, my lady, but he insisted on exploring the outside forest, she said, and Morgraine looked pitying. I have no idea if he will return at all, let alone when. She bit her lip and fought down the sensation rising in her gut as a wave of dread swept through Whitemane, sending shivers up and down her spine, speeding up her heartbeat and flooding her body with adrenaline. Gosh. I told him not to go, she growled. Morgraine arched an eyebrow at her, and her tone was almost worried. He wasn't sure what to make of it, but he put a reassuring hand on her shoulder and spoke in a calming voice. He started by saying, he likes you and will be back, he won't desert you. Whitemane only appeared to be a little more convinced of this, but she chose to keep quiet and concentrate on the uneasiness instead. An event is taking place. I sense it, she whispered. A moment later, there was a distant explosion that was inside the monastery's boundaries. Whitemane's gaze grew wide. Get the others together, Morgraine. The cathedral was abruptly rocked by another, more horrifying explosion, saturating everything with shrapnel and fire. 69. He had wandered quite a distance, smelling the forest, enjoying the breeze as it blew past, ruffling his hair and fur and apparently warming his cheeks. He could sense it. The wind, the earth, the water, they were here. They were still active, but they didn't know he was there. He smiled. When the time comes. Naruto's nose and ears both twitched, and he froze in mid-step, turning to face the Scarlet Monastery as fear suddenly swept through his body. What the devil? He mumbled, his whole body tensing up all at once, making it sound like an explosion, but the monks didn't use explosives. He leapt to the top of the tallest tree he could find and looked toward the monastery, which was quite a distance away. Damn, he had gone farther than he had anticipated. The monastery was still visible to him, though, and he almost dropped his sword in horror when he saw that someone was attacking and that smoke was rising from the Crusade stronghold. He knew those other two would return with reinforcements, so he should not have allowed them to escape. Suddenly, the wind was heavy with the smell of smoke and blood. He whispered, Sally. Shan pulled out his sword and took off toward the monastery. If he lost his first friend since waking up, he would be damned. Hold on, Sally. Shan, I'm coming. As he shot toward the monastery, he was blind to the slight increase in wind flow. 69. The monastery's main hall entrance was a scene of chaos, with Kamal's mace crushing the skull of a priest who had the audacity to turn away from him. Laviaria, standing next to him, dispatched crusader after crusader with ease and skill, invisible to the untrained eye, and the sounds of battle reverberated all around them. In a matter of minutes, The Horde and Forsaken completely overran the main hall before flooding into the armory, library, cathedral, and graveyard. Sylvanas herself had long since disappeared. She was only interested in Whitemane and that beast man. The two members of the Horde were suddenly alone in the main hall, as everyone else had already moved deeper into the monastery, leaving behind the bloodied remains of their victims. Kamal, Laviaria began, gently pulling his cloak to startle him out of his reverie. The hall was eerily quiet, almost forbidding. From somewhere close to the cathedral, or was it at the cathedral itself, a sudden explosion shook the ground. Laviaria appeared uneasy. "Let's go," the shaman said, nodding reassuringly to the rogue before pointing to the library's entrance. Right. 69, that blast. It was unexpected. How in the world did they get here so quickly? A sphere of holy light was still glimmering around her form as she staggered out from under a piece of broken roof, and it was reflex alone that had saved her life. Whitemane's dirt. Smeared face frowned as the dust cleared, concealing her rage and her sudden fear. The light seemed to come to life around her just as the explosion occurred. "Morgraine!" she shouted, praying that her friend from childhood had made it out alive. A beam of wood shifted aside, exposing the Scarlet commander and a few monks, huddled under a protective dome of light. Morgraine's face unnaturally pale and drenched in sweat, his brow knit tight. His voice was raspy. Right here, my lady," and he appeared to be barely conscious. Whitemane's eyes grew wide, and she rushed to him to assist in clearing the debris that was trapping them. She whispered, "Hold on, Commander," pulling and twisting with all the strength her small body possessed until, at last, a big piece of wood and a broken pillar slid away, allowing Morgraine to drop his barrier. A second later, he dropped, gasping for air. A sharp gasp was heard. "My lady, observe." Boom. Before one of the monks pushed her aside, a barrel-shaped bomb roughly Whitemane's height dropped from the sky and crashed into the wall directly next to where she had been. She cried out in pain as she felt a couple of her ribs break after the subsequent explosion threw her across the room and into a suit of armor. What the hell had happened? "Oh no!" Whitemane gasped in horror as the dust settled and a sickly green slime covered the entire space, rotting away the walls and floor. A foul stench hit her nose, and she was shocked to learn that it was the smell of rotting flesh. Lady Whitemane. A body still wearing red plate armor emerged, followed by a rotting, discolored hand. Whitemane's breath escaped her lips as Morgraine, now dead, stood up, his frightened eyes gazing back at her with resignation and incredulity. "Milady, you must." Then the rotting body of the Scarlet commander appeared to melt and crumble before her eyes, and the monks around him, including the one who had rescued her, died in the same way, their bodies disintegrating and blending into the green slime. Morgraine. The Forsaken were engaging in the use of a plague. Whitemane heard one word before she screamed in horror as the green slime twitched and started to move, forming a distorted human face on its surface before rising up as a single mass that towered over her by 2 feet. Ruin. 69. Burn in the fire of righteousness. He unleashed his explosion of arcane flames, turning a number of other foolish adventurers into smoldering corpses at his feet. These Horde monsters and their undead abomination allies have gone too far now. It isn't enough that they send out small groups to kill them all the time, but now this invasion? Arcanist Doan hurried through the library, leaving his study and crushing any idiots who happened to get caught in sight. Doan's arcane energy exploded outwards, throwing the Forsaken away like an old doll before he was obliterated by a large fireball. A rogue appeared behind him, intending to backstab him. He needed to reach Lady Whitemane. Obviously, if such a large-scale invasion was taking place, he needed to reach the cathedral to help defeat the enemy. Loxi was undoubtedly already there, but he had no idea where Herod was, and Vicious was most likely already dead. He was not a fool. He had always been able to draw conclusions with exactitude and finality, and what he was drawing made his heart race with both excitement and fear. The long-awaited battle had finally arrived, the undead had become serious, and that Banshee was probably here too. When he turned a corner with staff ready and arcane energy flaring around him, he saw an orc and a Forsaken, who appeared somewhat surprised to see him, as well as Herod. Corpses of both the Horde and the Crusade were scattered everywhere, with a few still alive, their pathetic groans resonating through the corridor with an almost eerie quality. Herod felt anger rising inside of him as he saw his subordinates, his students, his comrades. It seems like more monsters come to die. With fire erupting all around him, he prepared his staff and said, "Get ready to die." His mind exploded with pain as he was flung back a good 20 feet and slammed into the wall, but the orc reacted first, and Doan almost missed his blow as the mace he wielded blurred forward at his head, ending the fight before it even started. He ducked, barely escaping a fatal blow but still taking a blow to the shoulder, snapping the bones there like cheap sticks. The undead girl suddenly appeared in front of him before he could register his unexpected injury. Her body was nearly flawlessly preserved, with unharmed pale blue-gray flesh covering every part of her body except for her hands and forearms, which were entirely bone. She had a slightly plump, unblemished face that stared back at him with nervous but determined yellow eyes. Her dark green hair was pulled up in pigtails. Her equipment simply shouted that she was a rogue. Monster. Scrub. Get out of here. The orc caught her almost effortlessly and set her down as Doan's arcane energy burst, sending the Force Akenis flying away from him with a loud yelp of surprise. Doan muttered, "Make peace with your gods, if you have one," as his magic started to swirl around him. The orc made a few hand gestures and grunted something in his own language. Around him, 4 totems rose up out of the earth, and the orc's hands started to glow. The orc was a strong shaman, but Doan was prepared. "The Crusade will win today," he shouted as he prepared to strike. Doan's soul winced in unrestrained terror, and his whole body froze. Wit.irk, lady, and he paid the price for his error. Doan's wide, terrified eyes turned to the rogues, and they had an oddly dejected expression. As she took her dagger from his throat, she muttered, I'm sorry," and the orc watched helplessly as Doan fell to the ground. No, this cannot be how it ends, Whitemane, lady, your voice was that, Whitemane, lady, fuck it. His eyesight grew hazy. This was not how it was supposed to end. I am obligated to protect. Doan passed away with regrets and sadness. Kamal glanced at the human mage, who looked distraught, and then turned away. "Let's go," he said to the rogue, who nodded and followed after permanently shutting Arcanist Doan's eyes. "May you find peace at last," she muttered in a voice that was filled with pain. 69. He stopped when that scream ripped through the air. His eyes took on a brilliance no one knew he possessed. His mind went blank and filled with only one goal, and chaos surrounded him, with bodies all over the floor and bombs continuing to dot the monastery at random and haphazard intervals, most of which appeared to be directed at the cathedral. The air was ripped with screams, clashing metal, and furious animalistic snarls and barks, and he could hear dozens of fights between his subordinates and the invaders raging all around him. His leader's safety was the only thing that mattered, so he had to get to Lady Whitemane. Loxi prepared his rifle and drew out his whistle. The sharp sound, too high, pitched for human ears, sounded, alerting all the dogs in the vicinity to the call, but none of them responded because they didn't have to. 4 dogs, almost as tall as any human male, appeared out of what appeared to be the shadows themselves. Vicious and prepared for battle. Loxi's hounds were very different from the mastiffs that the rest of his subordinates used. They were hyenas, incredibly clever and crafty hyenas with a gleam in their eyes that could rival the fervor of any crusader. They approached Loxi as if they didn't care about the mayhem around them and waited. The hyenas nodded as he muttered, "I'm sure you heard it too, my beloved partners. There is a problem with Lady Whitemane. We will do everything in our power to keep her safe." The hounds started to move after letting out snarling and barking laughter. "All right, then," he screamed and started running. An orc attempted to stop him. A second later, he collapsed with a hole in his chest. He yelled, "Out of the way, fiend," as he passed the dying humanoid and entered the hallway. There was nothing that could stop him. 69. With wide, terrified eyes, Whitemane rushed out of the cathedral's ruined doors and looked over her shoulder. With its face fixed on her and its whole body trembling with an odd excitement, the slime was directly on her ass, the green muck seeping between crevices and slurping out of the open door. It had happened so quickly, and before she knew it, her emotions had taken over. She picked up a little more speed. Boom! She nearly passed out as the wall to her right exploded outward, jarring her already broken ribs and sending her flying to the left with an agonized scream. It appeared as though the slime was approaching her slowly to increase her level of fear. Her whole body screamed in protest at any movement, and blood dripped from the corner of her mouth. She refused to fall, though. Not so simple. She stumbled to her feet, forcing her eyes to focus. This creature that was once her friend. This deranged monstrosity made by the damned Forsaken. She whispered, "Come then, monster," as the holy light started to pulse all around her. "I think not, human." Something landed behind the High Inquisitor as the slime abruptly froze. At the same moment, the woman whirled around and leapt a few feet away, her eyes widening. In front of her, Sylvanas Windrunner had a sly grin on her face that hinted at a great deal of pain. She said, "Hello, Lady Inquisitor." Whitemane's fear suddenly gave way to anger and hatred. "You?" she exclaimed as the light around her began to return. "You did this, monster. Abomination. Undead perversion of nature." As the leader of the Scarlet monastery screamed like an animal and charged at her, the Banshee Queen grinned even more. Whitemane gasped in agony as Sylvanas kicked her hard in her broken ribs, sending her flying back. "Yes, I did, human. And I plan to do so much more." The slime monster trembled, wanting to eat her, but it dared not take the Dark Lady's prey away. As the undead elf got closer, Whitemane spit up more blood and gave her a vile look. She stomped on Whitemane's chest and used her foot to pin her to the ground, asking, "Where is he? Where is this famed protector of yours?" Gah. "I won't ask again, human." Whitemane was in danger of breaking his ribs as Sylvanas's boot dug deeper into them. However, this only served to increase the woman's righteous rage, which caused her to sneer at the other woman. "I'll die before I reveal that information to you, witch." Sylvanas scoffed. "I will have this new toy, Lady Whitemane. Unhand her." "Monster." Half a second before Sylvanas was actually flung from Whitemane, two voices sounded simultaneously, and two enormous creatures snarled as they tried to tear her throat out. When Loxie and Herod appeared, they hurried to Whitemane's side, making her happier than she had ever been to see anyone in her life. Otherwise, the slime monster would have caught them and almost swallowed the hero before a battle could start. "Light!" Loxie cried. Whitemane clutched at her injured ribs and gasped, "What in God's name is that thing?" "Be careful. That thing is." Boom. Gah. Another scream of horror, another explosion, another flight through the air. Loxie gasped in horror as the left side of his body melted away, and Whitemane saw it just in time to see a pale gray hand grab her neck and lift her into the air. "Gah!" Sylvanas scoffed. She sneered again and asked, "Is that all you can say?" Herod ran to Sylvanas and said, "My lady." Herod was so furious that he cut through the slime monster's interruption, rendering it inoperable for a few crucial seconds. There was hardly time for Sylvanas to drop Whitemane and get away from the enormous war axe. "Abomination! You shall not leave this monastery alive." The Banshee Queen got back up on her feet with a roll. She smirked sinisterly, her swords drawn and her lip parted. The slime monster trembled with excitement, engulfing the remainder of Loxie's body and swatting aside the two hyenas that were left after the last explosion killed the other two. "Oh really?" the undead woman was asking. "And I suppose you are to bring about my death?" Whitemane's half-lidded eyes gazed up at Herod. She was protected from the Banshee Queen and her repulsive little pet by the giant man standing guard in front of her. Her eyes began to well up with bitter tears. They had been caught completely off guard by the Forsaken. It was so pathetic. Never in her life had she felt so powerless. What had gone wrong? Hugo. Herod ripped Whitemane away from her with a powerful axe heave. The weapon was hurled directly at Sylvanas, who froze in surprise at the unexpected movement. The assault would have been successful. The fight should have ended then and there because the axe would have cut her in two. However, it appeared that fate had one more ploy in store. The slime monster screamed like a gurgle. Saved the life of the Banshee Queen by slamming into her and pushing her aside. With such force, the axe embedded itself in the wall, and nothing could pull it out. 3 sets of eyes grew wide as the slime monster's warped human face appeared to become more recognizable. "Sorry, Herod," Loxie said, grinning weakly. "But it's obvious who deserves to kill this bitch." A second later, the slime dissolved and turned into a puddle of goo. The words, "Damn you, Loxie," were barely out of Herod's mouth when a blade sank into his abdomen. "Hey, what a stupid comrade you have. That was your one chance and you were betrayed." Herod fell to his knees, coughing up blood and staring up at the Banshee Queen. "Perhaps," he started, his vision hazy. Sylvanas looked down at the scene as something fell onto the wall behind him. Abruptly, the wind started to increase. He grinned and lowered his head, saying, "But I can see why he did it. After all, he has the lady's faith, even more so than Morgraine did." He grinned. "Isn't that right, beast?" Sylvanas froze when she heard a growl from above and behind her. It was a menacing, feral growl that sent waves of fear and trepidation through her entire body. She became conscious of the wind's rapid volatility at that moment. She whirled around when she heard the High Inquisitor exclaim the name, Naruto. Nothing was there. "Turn around." Sylvanas nearly gasped as she spun her blade around and saw that it was locked with a glowing red and blue monstrosity of a sword. gazing into a pair of angry eyes of the same color. The High Inquisitor was shielded from his body by one arm. "Hello, bitch." Sylvanas only had time to start gasping in wonder before he continued speaking after she had taken in a full view of his body. "And goodbye." 69. With a shout of, "Get down now," Kamal's eyes widened and he suddenly tackled Laviaria to the ground. And not a second too soon, as the totem that called for the help of the air itself broke just before everything else collapsed due to a sudden blast of wind and power. It came with a dreadful howl that echoed throughout the country. Laviaria let out a terrified scream. Kamal shrank in terror since he was aware of the cause and would always be aware of it. That howl would stay with him forever. As the winds picked them up and threw them all in different directions, he managed to hold onto the frail rogue by praying to the spirits and applying stone skin to himself and Laviaria. 69. Eyes popped open, glowing, and from inside his territory, they drew closer. What is that? He heard it call. It called out to him. It begged for a collaboration he was unaware of. However, he thought, this is, somehow familiar. How? It now pulled at his core, threatening to use his power directly, ready to unleash it on the world in a terrible storm of devastation. No, Alakir felt his very being struggle grudgingly to pull himself away from the presence. It was very inviting and enticing. It seemed as though a long, lost friend was beckoning him. However, he had to. He would never help someone he didn't know. However, he would be observing. Oh, the Wind Lord would be looking on, eager to experience that presence once more with an odd sense of anticipation. How intriguing. Fear was unknown to Sylvanas Windrunner. The Banshee Queen leader of the Forsaken had long since set aside that feeling after fighting against, losing to, serving, and then fighting against a monster like the Lich King. She believed she had, at least. As soon as Naruto said, "and goodbye," the ground itself seemed to come alive and ripped the Banshee Queen from her feet and into the air. The wind threatened to tear her to pieces with its sudden ferocity, leaving her in the hands of a cruel child like an old rag doll. Her mental sense of direction and mobility were completely taken away. The howling gale that engulfed her not only destroyed everything that dared be near Naruto, but it also robbed her of all other feelings, making her ears feel as though they would burst from the noise alone. She would undoubtedly be deaf for a considerable amount of time, if she was fortunate. Sylvanas experienced fear she had never believed she was capable of experiencing as the rushing winds almost carelessly threw her around and across the silver pine forest while accompanied by that unholy howl of power and rage. As she sailed across the land, finally passing through a tree and landing in a broken heap, she thought hazily, "What is he?" As she passed her horrified and ravaged troops, before she could even gasp, he appeared out of nowhere. From behind a veil of howling wind, those eyes, frightening yet breathtakingly beautiful, glared down at her. He approached her with slow, methodical steps while his long, inexplicably magical tails wavered behind him, spreading out like the petals of a strange new flower. The High Inquisitor, who appeared to be barely conscious, was clutched protectively in the grasp of his left arm. She was minuscule in comparison to him, and Sylvanas observed that she was likely also small in comparison to this creature. In that man's hands, the human appeared both defenseless and safe. He held his enormous blade in his right hand. Without a doubt, it was the most exquisite blade she had ever seen, and she could feel the nature magic whirling inside of it. Fire and wind. A weapon was created by element forging that blade. Amazing. She fought to straighten herself as he drew closer, not wanting to die in a state of indifference, if nothing else. Her dazzling red eyes met his and gave him a defiant glare. He hesitated. The forest was suddenly quiet and deserted, and the roaring winds had vanished. However, the fact that she could see the extent of the damage he had caused during his brief outburst frightened her even more. Who was he? Was that a spell from a shaman? It certainly appeared to be one. She was startled out of her reverie as he opened his mouth to speak. Anger taking over his voice, he exclaimed, "What the fuck?" The blade was at her throat, threatening to chop off her head, and she asked, "Who the hell do you think you are, huh?" Refusing to answer to this creature, she remained silent. She would die knowing that she had shown him no weakness if he were to murder her. So she waited and waited for him to lose patience and stop talking to her before he could learn anything useful. She was lifted rather roughly into the air and brought almost nose to nose with him when a tail suddenly lashed out and wrapped around her neck. She looked so closely at Whitemane. She had the opportunity to kill her before the beast reacted, but she hesitated, and that was sufficient. After gazing into her eyes for more than a minute, he let out a sigh and threw her away. Her eyes widened in surprise as she thumped to the ground. He snarled, "Whatever, I don't care." His eyes flashed, and he shot her a stern look. You obviously have your reasons for attacking Sally Chan in her home, but I don't care enough to find out why. I have more important things to worry about. He said, but know this, first. He stopped to give her a stern look, as if she were defying the warning he was about to issue. He turned to leave, saying, if you come after us. If you attack her again, I will kill you. That is your only warning. Dismissing her, he turned and started to leave, disappearing into the mist. His dismissal was so casual that her eyes widened, as if she no longer merited his time or the trouble of a fight. Then she became suddenly angry and her eyes narrowed. She bit out, don't turn your back on me, beast. Turn around and face me. The Biju.kin, however, were already disappearing into the fog. No. She leapt to her feet and lunged, willing her body to move with unexpectedly renewed strength. Nobody disregarded her. Face me. Naruto was tackled to the ground before he could even open his eyes. Whitemane dropped to the floor. 69. About Mishonen, two things are known and a great deal is unknown. The first is that, despite killing crusaders below in the name of the scourge, Mishonen appears to be rather emotionless and uninterested in anything. People who know him frequently talk about how he lacks emotion, words, and the general will to do anything. He never accomplished much and never expressed his opinions through words, giving the impression that he was a sluggish worker. The second fact about him, which only a select few are aware of, is that the Lich King has a moderate amount of control over him. He is openly distrusted and disliked by many other Death Knights. Some have even attempted to murder him because they are upset that he dared to challenge the Lich King in any way. But any attempt on his life was stopped by the Lich King himself. There is no need to persecute the Blood Elf Death Knight because he has not yet shown any signs of disloyalty, and Arthas appears amused by Mishonen's predicament. That's what the young Death Knight took advantage of. Mishonen was able to think for himself, do things for himself, and subtly free himself more and more every day due to the Lich King's misplaced trust, or whatever it was, and he showed no desire for anything else, even for himself, aside from what he hoped would happen. Then he saw her for himself. The majority of Death Knights keep their last name from their time in life, usually only altering it to reflect their personality, style, or even their spec. Then there are people who are born with no recollection of anything, including their names, or who were so gifted that they essentially had no choice but to take on a new name. Glacial, the Death Knight recruit, was the ideal illustration of this. Her life must have been that of a frost mage. The phenomenon that occurred during her dark rebirth could not be explained in any other way. He'd been there, guarding the shackled bodies of undeserving initiates, when he felt her power burst from her, shrouding everything in a thick layer of ice and almost instantly killing instructor Resuvius. What? Arrrghhh. He had witnessed her eyes widening and bewildered as her pale hand clamped down on the necromancer's wrist, causing him to freeze solid almost immediately with a gasp and hiss. He had also witnessed the ragged clothes she was wearing during her death and rebirth break like glass and fall away from her. Her ice-devoured ghouls, abominations, and undeserving initiates. Everyone had little chance. She made people panic. Everything within 30 feet was frozen solid, everything beyond that was chilled to near freezing, and Resuvius was rendered incapable. He had never witnessed such strength. He was amazed. He was intrigued by it. He saw her again a few weeks later, completely clothed and armored, enchanted, and specially made for her because ordinary armor would only last a minute before disintegrating. She was not allowed to be too close to people or even touch anything with her bare hands. She was somewhat of an outsider. She remained silent. Still, no one made an effort to speak with her. She didn't say a word, not even when she was being instructed by the Lich King himself. And her eyes, cold and completely blank, glowed with the rage of 1,000 winters. She was the embodiment of frost. Even a Death Knight found her terrifying. Nevertheless, Mishonen was unable to stop observing her. Like him, she was an elf. Her body was concealed by plate and cloth, showing no skin at all, but it was still distinctly slender and curvy, and her gait was a lovely, elegant melody that revealed her skill from a previous life. He followed her everywhere, subtly, of course, so that each time he went by her, it appeared to be a coincidence. In order to watch this woman, he even ceased quietly releasing himself from the Lich King's grasp. He had been given that task by Arthas around this time. Their leader appears to be a Biju.kin, a race that is even older than the trolls and night elves. Strong natural creatures trapped in crystal beneath the earth. Getting this creature into the ranks of the Scourge was his mission. Additionally, it was to be his final day with her. No, it was just not acceptable, so he went to her. 69. Shortly after he had started stalking her, Glacial had noticed. He believed he was being subtle, but to her he was essentially a beacon, standing out among the innumerable drones as a distinct individual, his eyes gleaming with desire and interest when he gazed at her. What was it he desired? He was following her, but why? He was back there. Maybe he was just trying to pretend that it was a coincidence that he was walking straight at her. She nearly grinned. He was such a blatantly obvious but mildly amusing man. He walked toward her, and she caught a glimpse of him. He would undoubtedly carry on as though he hadn't even noticed her, then give her a very fleeting glance back when he believed she wasn't looking. She stifled a sigh that was almost bitter. That man couldn't possibly approach her. He would die almost immediately from her cursed body. Glacial. Her stalker's eyes widened and met hers. He was speaking to her. What changed? Her face went blank, and her eyes narrowed. Before she finally spoke, they stood silent for well over 10 seconds. Her voice was a chilly, frozen mist that sounded like a whisper from the Lich King himself. What do you want? 69. Naruto quickly sprang back to his feet and was prepared for battle after throwing Sylvanas from him with a skillful back roll. The Banshee Queen also jumped up, her eyes glimmering with resentment. She drew her weapons and leveled them at the Biju. Kin, yelling, "No one ignores me." Naruto looked deadpan. His eyes narrowed in anger as he growled, "Are you fucking serious? What did I just tell you, damn it?" She yelled, "Shut up," and hurried to confront her adversary. A 3-second stalemate ensued as his sword caught her twin blades. Sylvanas was heaved off the ground and flung back as if she were nearly weightless. She grunted as her back struck a tree and fell to the ground, snarling and panting. Naruto drew his blade back for a swing and snarled like the beast he resembled. Once more, the wind whirled around him. Lady Sylvanas. The Biju. Kin was blindsided and had to jump to the side as 6 figures suddenly appeared out of the bushes. The warriors who attacked the Biju. Kin, dressed in maroon, gray, and black, screamed in desperation to shield their Dark Lady from the bestial guardian of the Scarlet Crusade. With his shields and blades ready, Naruto was nearly stunned into inaction when he finally caught a clear glimpse of the attack. What the F? And for his second moment of distraction, an arrow almost hit his temple. Determined to put an end to this small altercation and get Sally to safety as quickly as possible, he squatted and leapt, aimed his enormous blade at the Banshee Queen's ample chest, and fell upon her with the speed of a bullet. He then turned to snarl at Sylvanas. Gah! Her mouth exploded with black blood, and his red eyes widened in surprise. The wind, it propelled him. And Naruto's eyes narrowed in resignation as the enormous blade dug deeper into her sternum. As soon as they saw their queen being impaled, the 6 abandoned warriors all sprang at him. Their attack was halted in its tracks when 6 of his 9 tails swung out and grabbed them by the necks, crushing them in the air. With a nearly melancholy tone, Sylvanas whispered, "It didn't have to end this way, damn it. I gave you the chance to walk away," as he was struggling to breathe. After coughing again, Sylvanas grinned in response. She started with, "That you did, beast." When she pushed herself up his blade until she was nose to nose with him, Naruto's eyes widened. "And that was your first mistake." She gave him a wink that bordered on sensuality as her grin widened. "And your second mistake was underestimating the Banshee Queen." She inhaled deeply and let out a scream. 888. Biju, Kin, and Lord Arthas wants you to get into contact with it? Glacial was mentally reciting what Mishonen had said, and to be honest, she was taken aback by what she had heard. Following an altercation with their king, a mysterious race of shaman, like demons that were imprisoned in crystal deep beneath the Silithids' lands, and their apparent leader were on the loose. Was the man beside her supposed to turn this creature into a scourge? How? Mishonen just gave a nod. "Yes," he said. "The Lich King wants me to do this. He claims it to be a test of loyalty, but perhaps it is a ploy to be rid of me. Either way, I'm not all that concerned. The task itself is interesting enough." She just gave a nod. This task would at least get him out into the world. As long as he finished the assignment, he was allowed to do anything he wanted, aside from the fact that he would undoubtedly die again if he disobeyed the king's order. She could see why he would accept the position. But as soon as he stopped her and asked to speak with her, she had to find out the answer to the question that had been bothering her. "Tell me," she said, her dazzling blue eyes seemingly penetrating his own scarlet ones. She paused, looking at her gloved hands and clenching a fist, then said, "You tell me all of this, and spend time talking to me, ignoring the obvious threat I am to you. Why have you done so?" Mishonen smiled at this. She had never witnessed any of the Scourge's creatures do it. Never. She was sure that no one in their position should be able to display such emotion, but it was a sincere smile. He knelt, extended his hand to her, and uttered 3 words. "Come with me." 888. He had no idea what had transpired. He was in her face for a moment. Next up. AAARRRGGGGGGHHHH. The Banshee Queen was thrown like a rag doll as Sylvanas reared back in pain, swinging his blade to the left, almost eviscerating him in the process. None of this was apparent to him. The noise caused his ears to explode, blood to flow from his nose, and his eyes to become unstable and blurry. His head attempted to split apart as he fell, writhing in pain. He lost control of his body, and the heads of the abandoned warriors who were gripping his tails literally popped off their necks, causing them to die a second time. Sylvanas grinned in spite of the severe wound in her chest. Not even the beast had anticipated it. She congratulated herself in her mind for assuming that his ears were more than just a cute feature. More than anything else she had ever fought, he gave way to the scream with ease. Whether he could howl with enough force to bring down buildings or control the wind was irrelevant. It always hurts to have your eardrums destroyed, especially if your ears are extremely sensitive. Even as her vision went black, she couldn't help but smirk as she saw him roll around on the ground, writhing and swearing. She said, "This wound is nothing, beast," as she started to pass out. It takes more than simply a stab to kill an undead. She was confident that some of her abandoned or other horde members would discover them before he had a chance to recover, and she eagerly anticipated visiting him in his dungeon cell once she was well. Regretfully, she neglected to consider the High Inquisitor. Sally Whitemane's disregard for the unconscious Banshee Queen lying in a pool of her own blood a few yards away was a clear indication of how much she cared for Naruto. She chose to help him instead of seizing the chance. He was breathing heavily now, and she was positive he was on the verge of fainting. She was still reeling from the scream and knew she didn't have much time left before she herself passed out from exhaustion. It appeared serious, with his eyes, nose, and ears all bleeding. After saying, "See, come on, beast," she lifted him to his feet and draped an arm over her shoulders. He was so much bigger than her, damn it. Her words were, "We have to get out of here." She stumbled and fell. Damn it. She pushed herself back up and took Naruto's weight, ignoring the pain in her body's protests. After gaining stability, she walked into the forest with the intention of avoiding Sylvanas as much as possible. For an hour, she hobbled in a random direction, driven and determined until she was at her breaking point. She finally started to give in to her wounds and fatigue, her teeth clenched. Her head felt like it was about to blow up, and her ribs were killing her. Whitemane arrived at a rather innocent-looking clearing and walked up to a tree with thick trunks. She sat Naruto as gently as she could against the tree and then collapsed beside him, panting as his back rested against the tree. Thanks, Sally-chan, she smirked, her bloodied mouth parted. "Thank me, if we make it through the night, beast." There was a snort, and they both voluntarily fell unconscious. 888. Kamal was certain that he had a broken back. Every time he stepped, it hurt almost like an excruciating pain. A lesser man, shaman or not, would have been killed by that brief flight through the air, but he was one of the stronger members of his class and managed to keep himself and the renegade girl alive as they fell, allowing them to start heading back towards the Undercity right away. They didn't talk as they went. Every word that had to be said had been said or would be said. Kamal glanced over at the outlaw beside him. The girl had good reason to be afraid. Even he was a little frightened by that beastman's strength. It spoke of the terrifying potential to be so attuned to the elements that one of them would come to his aid without his having to use a totem or even call it out. He simply knew that it was merely a sample. It was pretty incredible. I mean, what shaman wouldn't want that kind of power? Gasp. He was abruptly and loudly ripped from his thoughts by Laveria's gasp. With daggers drawn and gripped in terrified hands, the outlaw leapt behind him. As they entered a clearing, his words, froze in his throat. He was the High Inquisitor of the Scarlet Crusade and the Beastman, both clearly injured and unconscious against a tree. He just stared at the two of them, stunned by what he was seeing, for well over a minute. That such a coincidence would even happen seemed ludicrous, but here they were, weak and defenseless. It would be so simple for him and Laveria to bring them in and get the prize. The rogue pulled at his arm and said, "K. Kamal," jolting him out of his reverie and making him sigh. Before making his choice, he gave the two unconscious individuals in front of him one final glance. 888. Glacial looked up into his eyes. Her whole body froze in disbelief. What? Mashonen's gleaming eyes flashed with hope as he reached out to her once more, his smile turning into a smirk. "Come with me, Glacial." Before her eyes narrowed in suspicion, she simply stared up at him for a few more seconds. As the temperature dropped, Mishonen's smile gradually dimmed. She hissed, "Why? Why the interest in me? You think I haven't noticed you watching me? Please?" At first, Mishonen appeared shocked, but she interrupted him as he started to splutter out refutations of her assertion. "Spare me the act and tell me what I want to know." Glacial thought for a moment that the man was going to bow and back off, but he straightened out and looked down at her with a serious expression that did not even hint at a smile. His sudden change in attitude startled her. He narrowed his eyes and said, "You want to know why?" Then, without warning, he stepped forward, yanked her to her feet, and pressed his lips to hers. A gasp was heard, and two sets of eyes grew wide. "You idiot."
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.